Today we need to be on page 716. This is chapter 9, lesson 5. We're focusing on finding the area of rectangles and knowing certain facts and properties about rectangles. Right? One thing that we need to understand is all you have to be a rectangle are opposite sides parallel. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my pen on here. So you'll notice that this line will never ever ever intersect with this line. They are parallel. And that this side will never ever intersect with this side. So two pairs of parallel lines makes a rectangle, but that's actually the definition of parallelograms. So rectangles are parallelograms, but what also a rectangle has to have are all four of the angles are 90 degrees. They are all right angles. So this is a rectangle. All right, so to find the area of a rectangle, it's the product of the length times the width. Now this is going to be very, very familiar because this is something you guys did when you were in 3rd grade and 4th grade when you're first starting to learn about multiplication. It talks about finding the area of rectangles, and basically you found this kind of drawing, and basically a rectangle was an array. You counted the squares, and the number of squares inside an object is the area. But as 6th graders, we do this little fancy L here, a little fancy W, and we discover same thing we discovered in 3rd grade. Like this is 1, 2, 3, and this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this happens to be 3 groups of 6, and that would equal 18. So that is the same as the length times the width, which is the formula we're going to be using now. So basically we're just doing the same old area array problems we did in 3rd grade. Please make sure you read the little section down here. This is essentially the same thing I just told you about. These examples are pretty straightforward. If you have a rectangle that has a length of 8 and 6, then we multiply 8 times 6, and it's going to be 48 square inches. You do need to know that the label will not be just be inches. It will be square inches because, as we talked about before, well, we're actually measuring 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're actually measuring, I was trying to get the right number. We're actually measuring all the squares that are in the inside, so it's got to be square inches, which can also be written as we know, because we've been doing exponents this year too, you can write inches squared as well. Okay? If you just leave it as plain inches, then what you're actually talking about, or what you would be describing, is perhaps the perimeter, which is the distance around, and the distance around is not a square unit. And on this side, really, the only scary part perhaps will be in today's lesson is we have to multiply sometimes by decimals, or you might even be asked to multiply by fractions. So it's the same thing. Just multiply one by the other. And again, come to Math Help if you don't know how to do these things. At the bottom of the page, they have an example that has fractions. So we're going to do that. So maybe that will lessen our anxiety. And remember, we are still trying to figure out, how much area, how many squares are inside the rectangle. So we're going to multiply the 4, and we're going to use our parentheses and not a multiplication x sign. And we're going to multiply that by 2 and 2/5. All right, the first step that you need to remember when you're multiplying a mixed number and a whole number is you have to change this into an improper fraction. So it's going to be 4, and actually this also has to be an improper fraction. So 4 over 1 times. Now the denominator stays the same, so this is going to end up having a 5 as the denominator. But what's the numerator going to be? Go ahead and tell me that, please. Very good. The numerator is actually going to be 2 times 5 is 10 plus 2. So it's going to be the improper fraction of 12/5. So now we're just going to multiply the numerator, multiply the denominator. 4 times 12 is what? Very good. That's 48. 5, excuse me, that's 48. 5 times 1 is 5. So now we need to divide 48 by 5. Now we're going to keep this as a fraction. Do not turn this into a decimal problem. What times 5 is close to 48 but not larger? Very good. The answer is 9. So we're going to subtract 45 and we get 3. Now instead of adding a 0, bringing it down, and continuing as a decimal, we're going to take the numerator. We're going to take the remainder, make it into a numerator, and then we're going to use the divisor as the denominator. So this is actually going to be equal to 9. Okay, 9 and 3/5. Wow, fifths inches. I don't know what happens to my pen. Squared. So that's how we go. 9 and 3/5 inches squared. Okay, now we're going to talk about squares. And squares are rectangles because, as you can see, their opposite sides are parallel, so they're parallelograms. And there are 4 right angles, so it's a rectangle. But the thing about squares is they have a special other characteristic where all 4 sides are equivalent. And so they're also going to be called a rhombus. So quadrilaterals have all sorts of crazy rules. We have to remember a square is a rhombus, a square is a rectangle, a square is a parallelogram, but a square, to be a square, it has to be a rectangle that has 4 equal sides. So there we go. So that means the formula is a little bit different. So we still could actually do length times width, but both numbers will be the same. So we can write that as the area of a square is equal to s squared. Remember, when you multiply a number by itself, it's actually has the exponent of 2. All right, let's go ahead and look at this example here. So we have a is equal to s squared. And area of a rectangle would be length times width. And they try to do the little cursive L so it doesn't look like the number 1. So in order to remember how to do s squared, just think length times width. And basically what we're doing is we're multiplying these two numbers together. So 9 times 9 is equal to 81. And that's exactly how you would solve 9 squared anyway. There are 2 factors. Both factors are 9. That's going to be 81. Let's go ahead and look at this next example. We're going to do the same thing. So in order to figure out the area of this square, it's going to be 4 and 8/10 squared. So we have to solve this problem. Go ahead and do the math and tell me what the answer is. Try to actually write it out and don't just use your calculator because we are practicing, 6th grade math. Thank you. All right, so we are not going to panic. We're just going to do the 2-digit by 2-digit problem. And at the very end, we notice that there are 1 decimal place for each of the factors. We move it over 2 places and the answer, and it's 23 and 4/100ths, and the units are centimeters, so we would actually label that as centimeters squared. Okay, so we're going to stop and think, what did we learn from this lesson? Go through the pages, come up with something specific.